I want to start with a room you've almost certainly been in. Beige carpet, folding chairs with padded seats that somehow still hurt, a box of tissues on every third row like someone measured it. There's a smell in that room I can't describe, but you already know, lilies and old air conditioning. And off to the side, there's a small office with a wooden desk, and at some point that day, somebody in your family sat there and signed something without really reading it. I was 20 when I sat in that office. My grandfather Walt died in Dayton, Ohio, and my mom asked me to come because I was, in her words, the one who's good with numbers. I was a sophomore. I was good with a graphing calculator. But I went. The funeral director slid a laminated sheet across the desk, and my mom picked the middle option. Not the cheapest, not the most expensive. The middle. It took her about 9 seconds. Total came to a little over $9,000, and I remember thinking, we just spent more than my car costs, and nobody negotiated anything. That was 15 years ago. I've spent the time since doing finance for a living, mostly small businesses, and I keep coming back to that afternoon because that room is one of the strangest economic environments in America. You have a buyer who is emotionally destroyed, who has never bought this product before, who will never buy it again, who has roughly 48 hours to decide, and who feels like asking about price makes them a bad son. That's not a market. That's a hostage situation with nice wallpaper. So today, let's open the books. What does a funeral home actually make? Where does the money really come from? Why is the most profitable part of the business the part nobody talks about? And why, despite all that, are a lot of these places quietly going broke? Start with a number that broke my brain the first time I saw it. There are roughly 19,000 funeral homes in the United States, and the average American funeral home handles about 113 funerals a year. 113. That's 2 a week. Sit with that. This is a business with a building, usually a big one, a parking lot, a chapel, a fleet of vehicles, refrigeration, a prep room that has to meet health code. And it's open 24 hours a day, every day, because people don't die on a schedule. All of that to serve 2 customers a week. Compare that to a Chipotle, doing 800 transactions a day. Same country, same economy, completely different physics. So how does it work at all? The ticket price is enormous. Per the National Funeral Directors Association, the median funeral with a viewing and burial runs $8,000 to $10,000 once you add the vault. Cremation with a service comes in lower, call it 6. 113 calls at $8,000 gets you to around $900,000 in annual revenue. Under $1 million for a business with a chapel and a hearse. Which brings us to my friend Danny Whitaker and the most uncomfortable dinner I've ever had. Danny bought a funeral home outside Springfield, Ohio in 2019. 2 locations, 3rd-generation family business. The previous owner's grandfather's name still on the sign. Danny came out of commercial insurance, so he wasn't naive about money. And about 6 months in, he called me and said, "Can you look at something? I think I'm losing my mind." He sent me the P&L. Top line was 1.1 million, above average. Then the cost started. Salaries and benefits, about 380,000. 2 licensed funeral directors, a part-time embalmer, an office manager, and a rotating crew of guys who carry caskets for $100 a service. Here's the part people miss. Those directors are on call. Somebody answers that phone at 2 in the morning when a nursing home rings, and somebody drives out there. Danny did 19 of those himself in year 1 because he couldn't afford another body on payroll. Facilities, about 140,000 between the 2 buildings. Utilities, insurance, property tax, the roof, the parking lot. Vehicles. A hearse is not a car. A new one runs north of $100,000. You also need a lead car, a van, and if you offer a limousine, another 6 figures. Danny leased. Call it $40,000 a year. Cost of goods, caskets, urns, vaults, printed programs. The register book, roughly $180,000. Advertising, licensing, software, the answering service, continuing education, another 80. Added up, and Danny was netting low six figures before he paid himself. On 1.1 million in revenue, call it a 10 to 12% margin. That's a real business. It is not the money printer everybody assumes it is. And then Danny said the thing that reframed the whole industry for me. He said, "The problem isn't the 113. The problem is what the 113 are asking for now." Which brings us to the single biggest story in this business, and almost nobody outside of it is paying attention. In 1970, the cremation rate in this country was under 5%. Under 5. Burial was simply what you did. By 2016, cremation crossed 50% for the first time in American history. Today, it's north of 60, and the industry's own projections have it heading toward 80% by the mid-2040s. Now here's why that's an earthquake, and not a trend. A traditional burial is a bundle. Embalming, cosmetics, a viewing, the chapel, a hearse, a casket, a vault, and the director's time across 3 or 4 days. Every one of those is a line item, and most carry real margin. A direct cremation is a phone call, a transport, some paperwork, a machine, and a box. In a lot of markets, you can get one for under $1,500. I've seen them advertised for $9.95. So the same death that used to generate $9,000 now generates $1,200. Same building, same payroll, same hearse payment, same phone at 2 a.m. Do that math. If your break-even is $900,000 a year and revenue per call drops from $8,000 to $3,000, you don't need 113 funerals. You need 300, and you cannot manufacture dead people. That's the squeeze. That's why the small independent that's been on Main Street since 1948 is quietly for sale right now. Okay, so let's talk about the part everyone thinks they already understand. The casket. You've heard that caskets are marked up. That's true. Wholesale on a standard steel casket might be $800 to $1,200, and the retail price on that same box might be $2,800 to $4,000. That's a big spread. But here's what people get wrong. Since 1984, that markup has been under attack by the federal government, and it's mostly lost. That year, the Federal Trade Commission passed the funeral rule, and it rewired the whole industry. It says a funeral home has to give you an itemized price list, called a general price list, before they show you anything. It says they can't require you to buy a package. It says they can't tell you embalming is legally required, when in most situations it isn't. And critically, it says if you buy a casket from a third party, they have to accept it, and they cannot charge you a handling fee for it. Which is why you can buy a casket on Costco's website. That's not a loophole. That's federal law working exactly as designed. My cousin Marcus tested this in 2022 when his father-in-law passed. Marcus is an engineer, and engineers grieve by building spreadsheets. He called 7 funeral homes in the same metro and asked one question: what's your price on a direct cremation? The answers ranged from $995 to $4,600. Same service, same city, 20-minute drive between the cheapest and the most expensive. He sent me the sheet and asked, "How is this legal?" The honest answer is that it's legal because almost nobody does what he just did. Most families call one funeral home, the one they've heard of, the one that buried grandma. Price discovery barely exists here, not because prices are hidden, but because nobody has the stomach to shop around while their father is in a refrigerated drawer. So, if the casket margin is under pressure and the burial is dying off, where does the actual money live? 2 places. And the second one is the whole ballgame. The first is the crematory itself. Not the cremation, the machine. A retort, which is the industry word for the furnace, runs somewhere around $100,000 to $200,000 installed, plus permits and emissions compliance, which in some counties is a nightmare. Most funeral homes don't own one. They send the body out to a facility that does and pay a trade cremation fee, usually $200 to $400. Flip that around. If you own the retort, every competitor within 40 miles pays you $300 a pop, and your marginal cost is gas and 2 hours of somebody's attention. Call it $100. You just built a toll booth. I've got a friend, Ellis, who spent 9 years in leveraged finance and then quit to buy a boring business, which is a very specific midlife crisis that's become fashionable in my industry. He bought a 2-location operation in the Carolinas. The first capital expenditure he made, before the carpet, before the website, was a retort. He told me, "I'm not in the funeral business. I'm in the utility business, and my utility is the only one in the county." That's the kind of sentence that tells you somebody has actually read the financials. But it's still not the best part. Here's the best part, and this is the thing I genuinely think most people have never heard. The most valuable asset in a funeral home isn't the building, the retort, or the name on the sign. It's the money for funerals that haven't happened yet. It's called pre-need, pre-arranged funerals. And it is, structurally, an insurance company hiding inside a service business. Here's how it works. A 71-year-old woman walks in on a Tuesday, healthy, organized, doesn't want her kids to have to decide anything. She plans her own funeral, picks the casket, the music, the flowers, and then she pays, today, $9,000, or installments over 5 years, and then she lives for 19 more years. Think about what just happened on the balance sheet. That funeral home collected $9,000 in 2005 for a service it delivers in 2024. Depending on the state, that money sits in a regulated trust or buys a life insurance policy, and the funeral home earns the growth on it, plus commissions along the way. That's float. That is precisely the mechanism that built Berkshire Hathaway. Warren Buffett collected insurance premiums today for claims he'd pay decades later and invested the gap. A funeral home with a good pre-need program is running a miniature version of the same trade, except the underwriting is easy because everybody eventually files the claim. And this is not small. Service Corporation International, the publicly traded giant, with something like 1,500 funeral homes and hundreds of cemeteries, carries a pre-need backlog measured in the billions. Not millions, billions of dollars of funerals sold and not yet performed. When Wall Street values SCI, a big chunk of what they're paying for is that backlog and the income sitting on top of it. My neighbor Judy did this in 1997. She prepaid, locked the price, and showed me the certificate once with real pride, the way people show you a paid-off mortgage. She passed in 2021, 24 years. Her family walked in, handed over the paperwork, and paid nothing. And here's the twist, because there's always a twist. That contract was price guaranteed, which means the funeral home in 2021 had to deliver a funeral that costs $8,000 in today's money against a payment made in 1997. If their trust investments outperformed funeral inflation, they made money on Judy. If they didn't, they lost money on Judy. That's not a service business anymore. That's an asset liability matching problem. That is literally what pension actuaries do for a living. Some funeral homes are excellent at this. Others sold aggressive price-guaranteed contracts in the 90s, invested conservatively into a low-rate world, and are now performing funerals at a loss on a client list they can't escape. There have been real scandals, trust funds raided, contracts unfunded, families showing up with a certificate worth nothing. So when someone tells you funeral homes are a recession-proof cash machine, the honest answer is, the good ones are financial institutions, and the bad ones are financial institutions run by people who never wanted to be. Now, what's one of these things actually worth? When my friend Priya was doing diligence on a small roll-up a couple years back, the first thing she did wasn't look at revenue. She counted calls. Because in this industry, call volume is the multiple. Small independents tend to trade somewhere around 4 to 6 times EBITDA, or roughly 1 to 1.5 times revenue, though it swings by market. Buyers also use a per-call number, something like $15,000 to $25,000 per annual call, adjusted for burial versus cremation mix. 150 burial-heavy calls in a stable town beats 300 cremation calls in a price war market, every time. But Priya told me the real diligence question is one you'd never see in a model. She said, "How old is the owner? And is his name on the building?" Because that name is the entire moat. It's not a brand in the Nike sense. It's 100 years of local trust, and it's why a family drives past a cheaper competitor without thinking about it. If the family that built the name walks out the door, you've got maybe 5 years before call volume drifts, and no marketing budget fixes it. You're buying a reputation and hoping it doesn't notice the owner changed. Priya passed on that deal, by the way. The seller wanted a full multiple and planned to retire to Florida in 90 days. She said, "He's selling me the building and keeping the actual asset." So let's zoom out, because there's one more force in play, and it points in an interesting direction. Roughly 3.1 million Americans die each year, and that number is climbing fast. The boomers are aging into their 80s, and by the early 2040s, annual deaths are projected to approach 4 million. More customers, guaranteed, demographically locked in. You will never see a demand curve that certain in any other industry. And revenue per customer is falling off a cliff at the same time. That's the whole industry in one sentence. Volume up, ticket down. It's why the consolidators keep buying. Because at scale, you share a crematory, share a fleet, share a prep room across 6 locations, and the fixed cost problem gets a lot less scary. Meanwhile, the single location family operator with the beautiful 1920s building and the enormous heating bill is doing the same volume as always and slowly realizing he's running a museum. And there's a new wave coming that I don't think anyone has priced in. Alkaline hydrolysis, what people call water cremation. Human composting, now legal in a handful of states. Green burial with no vault, no embalming, no concrete. Every one of those does to a P and L exactly what direct cremation did, and then some. So let me land this where I started. I've modeled restaurants, car washes, laundromats, self-storage, a bowling alley once. I've never found another business where the customer's ability to judge the product is this close to zero, where the seller's incentive to exploit that is this high, and where, in my actual experience, most of them just don't. Danny said something on that call that stuck with me harder than any of the numbers. The hardest part of the job isn't the bodies and isn't the money. It's that he's the only person in the room who has done this before. Everyone else is having the worst week of their life for the first time. And at 3 a.m., in a nursing home hallway, he still has to be the calm one. That is a real service. It's worth paying for. And when my grandfather died, that man in Dayton did it well, even though we overpaid. And honestly, I'd probably pay it again. The part I'd change is this. Get the price list. Federal law says they hand it to you, they can't force a package, and you can bring your own casket. Then make one call to a second funeral home. 1. It takes 4 minutes, and it has saved people I know thousands of dollars at the exact moment they could least afford to lose it. And if you're anywhere near it, have the conversation with your parents now, at a kitchen table, on a Tuesday, when nobody's crying. That single conversation is worth more than every spreadsheet I've ever built. If you got something out of this, hit subscribe. I break down the real economics of businesses like this every week, the ones nobody puts on a magazine cover. And tell me in the comments, has your family been through this, and what did it actually cost? I read every one, and the numbers you send me are usually more interesting than anything I find in a filing. I'll see you in the next one.